Welcome back, everyone, to the Human Role. We are now into episode 2. So first, we want to thank everyone for watching our first episode on artificial intelligence. Thank you for subscribing and liking the video, and for the people that shared and reposted. We really appreciate the support. So we hope you guys got a lot of good insight out of that episode, and we'll make sure we follow up in the next coming months on that progress. However, episode 2, as we mentioned before, is going to be on employee retention. And as we, of course, kind of transition from AI into how that's going to affect our industry, employees are worried about their jobs, right? And so how can companies really help keep their employees happy? And so I think from things that we've looked through and things that we've researched, this is more so becoming an employee market versus an employer market. Generations prior to us used to stay with companies for many, many years and decades. And not to say that that isn't happening with our generation, but it's changing, right? And there are employees that are requiring more in order to stay put for a more long-term stance with companies. Otherwise, there's a lot of other opportunities out in the world, and employees are jumping to that. So from our stance, we've done a lot of research on maybe like top 10, 15 items that could really help keep your employees engaged. And so we're just going to sort through that and just go through things that we've come across, provide you all with, certain insight, and hopefully will help, you from an employer stance, but also from an employee stance if you're in the process of trying to decide, should you stay, should you go, and help you weigh out your pros and cons. So with that being said, Chris, if you'd like to maybe kind of start and get into some of the initial articles that we read about, and then we'll get into the podcast.
Well, thank you, Tiana. And I'm sure most are familiar with the Great Resignation or the Big Quit phenomenon, which is this ongoing economic trend where employees have been voluntarily leaving their jobs in massive numbers. Now, this started in 2021 in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's still happening today. And some of the reasons that workers have been quitting in such large numbers there's a lot of factors, but a handful that we've found: wage stagnation, the rising cost of living, limited opportunity for career advancement, unfortunately hostile work environments from time to time, lack of benefits, inflexible remote work policies, and a long-lasting dissatisfaction on the job. And I was reading this article, it's from July of 2023 from Yahoo Finance on this topic, and it discussed a recent LinkedIn study, and it showed that nearly 70% of the folks in Gen Z and millennials, they're planning to leave their current employment this year. So these folks are demanding more from their jobs and are willing to quit at these continued high rates during the country's currently low 3.4% unemployment rate. So there may also be a disconnect that we were talking about when preparing for this episode between employees and management as another reason that these issues are occurring. And a survey by a Resume Builder showed that 3 of 4 managers find Generation Z more difficult to work with than other generations. Now, this is not to throw a generation under the bus, just to point out that there can be a disconnect between management and employees, a communication issue. And also you see a lot more workers are turning to the gig economy to kind of become their own bosses. They like the idea of this entrepreneurial setup. This is a multifaceted concern and one that employers have been trying to remedy by making changes to company culture, offering more creative benefits. But is it enough? Are there other solutions? How can high talent turnover affect an employer? And, we've been looking at this for a little bit of time. And so I thought we'd get started with the cost of employee turnover. And then I'm going to throw it back to Tiana. But according to this LinkedIn article in May of this year, the United States has the largest staffing market in the world. And this article says that it is estimated that businesses in the US lose up to $1 trillion a year to employee turnover, which is quite a number. And that number is probably not fully capturing the overall cost of replacing lost talent. So we're going to talk about creative benefit offerings and other things employers can do to try to stop the big quit. But a good place to start is with the hiring process. So you're trying to match potential employees with a business. Other than making sure a candidate checks all the education and experience boxes, what we were thinking about that might make it kind of special is to think about what behaviors are important to a candidate. Skills can be trained, but starting with this understanding can help in the process. And I was thinking back to this 2009 TED Talk. This gentleman, his name is Simon Sinek, if I am saying that correctly. He talked about this golden circle idea. And you start with the why, meaning what is the company's purpose, its cause, its belief, and why should anyone care? And I think this is helpful for companies struggling with high rates of turnover to say, well, what is our why? What is our purpose? Why are we here that's exciting to someone to start and to stay? As I said, this can tie into a company's culture and is something you can showcase and illustrate when hiring for retention. A Forbes article from March 2022 said a strong company culture is the best retention strategy among high turnover. And so that's one of the first things we were looking at. And now I'd like to pass it back to Tiana and get her take on this kind of overall start of the situation and a number of the other things we've found.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris, for that. So you said it, you just hit it nail on the head at the very last article, right? So company culture is, in my opinion, is definitely key, just because even if you may not offer some of the best benefits, and maybe if your compensation is semi within market, but maybe if it's not over excelling market, if your culture is there, if employees really like the team that they're working with and the manager that they're working for, I would say that would mostly trump everything, right? So not for everybody, of course, but for the vast majority, I think that that would be big for your employees. And if you go back to the Yahoo article, I thought it was really interesting. There was a sentence in there where they said, sadly, the shenanigans of petty bosses are here to stay. And that really plays a heavy factor. So it all ties into culture. And there are, unfortunately, in many situations, right, with many companies where someone is great at their job and they land a manager position because of that, but they don't necessarily have proper manager training or, themselves don't know how to lead a team. They may be heavy micromanagers and demand certain things, but are they actually leaders? And getting to that point in anyone's career takes some time, right? So if you don't have, someone higher up in place that is properly sending managers through training and helping them from an HR stance on how to handle the human role, no pun intended, but how to handle the HR stance, how to properly provide feedback. There are times where employees may do things wrong and it's awkward to give feedback, right? Bad feedback, of course. And then sometimes if you're in a management position and there's some type of intimidation where your employee beneath you is doing a little more, that could also get into play, right? Where there's, competitive natures that start bashing heads. And I just think that from a manager stance or from a leader stance, you have to know that people underneath you are there to do things that not necessarily that you can't do, but they're there to enhance your team, right? And that's what builds a team, recognizing your own weaknesses so that your team can be that strength, and then also vice versa, right? Knowing your team's weaknesses to where you can be their strength. But a lot of times that does not happen. And so when a manager steps into place and isn't necessarily a leader and isn't taking the team and building the team and making everyone feel like an actual team, that really gets into the way. And then on top of that, if you're talking about compensation being an issue, if you're talking about benefits being an issue, now since the COVID-19 pandemic, we're looking at, remote work, right? And now we're seeing a shift where companies that were allowing employees to work from home, that's not really the case anymore, right? And so then that gets into the way of things. There's a lot of other factors that come into play here, but the culture is like the top part to me. I would even say, I know there are some articles we read where compensation was the top one. I would say the culture, in my opinion, is top, because maybe if you're a little bit younger in your years and just starting off, you may run after the money. But if you've been in corporate America for 5 to maybe 10 years, 5 to 8 years, you start quickly realizing you're spending most of your day, the vast majority of your day, with your coworkers. When you get home, you're eating, you're maybe spending some time to unwind, watching some TV, and then getting to bed. You have to make sure that the culture that you're with 40 hours plus a week is there and is up to par. That definitely is a huge factor. But I want to also mention something on the TED Talk, Chris, but wanted to see if you had any other insight there.
When you were bringing up company culture, it made me think of something I saw on Instagram the other day. There is this other gentleman who's a motivational speaker, former Navy SEAL. His name is Jocko Willink, and he's written books, one called Extreme Ownership. And I was watching this video, and it kind of ties into what you were saying about company culture. And he said, what do you want? And he's talking about from a management point of view and an employee point of view. He said, as a manager, I think it's my responsibility and an opportunity to find out, what do my employees want? Like, some of them, maybe they're looking to become managers someday. Some may say, I don't know what I want from this job right now. I'll give it my best, and so forth. They said, feel like having those honest conversations. And then from the manager point of view, be like, well, this is what the company is. This is what it offers. And this is what we're all about. Is just having those, you were saying before, like, they can be uncomfortable conversations, but kind of breaking through that and having those talks. I think that it helps both parties to feel a little bit more comfortable and understand a bit more. And then you can, if the employee is feeling like, well, there's this particular path I'm looking for, I'm like, okay, let's get you on that path. Let's put you in the right direction. And then that way the manager knows, okay, this person is looking to go here, and here are the skills and tools, and we can move them that way. And so to what you said before, I agree. I think, as one of the bullet points we're going to talk about, a competitive salary, pay transparency, I think are important. But I think you hit the nail on the head, that company culture comes first.
From that stance too, there are some people that just unfortunately are not going to be able to take constructive criticism, right? So as you're providing that, and then there are some times where people don't take it well. I mean, I've experienced it before where people don't initially take it well, but then they take 24 hours and come back and they're like, okay, you know what, you were right. So it does take a bit of maturity, right, to get to that point. But ultimately, even if someone doesn't see the value in what you're saying at that point and say they move on and go another route, ideally it's their mindset is going to follow them to the next situation, right? And so I really do feel like down the line they're eventually going to have to circle back and recognize that maybe what they are doing is a problem, or whether they say that or not, maybe they fix it in the next situation. And so that is key. And I think heavy manager training is most likely the least that a company will really feeds into, right? As far as like a revenue, right? No one really pays for a manager to go through heavy training when they really should. And so that really could ding the company pretty heavily longer term. And whether you recognize it then or don't recognize it until later, if you pay attention to that and really pour into your managers, or before you promote someone, help coach them properly, that really could be a heavy game changer. But to also, get into the actual TED Talk from Simon that you mentioned, Chris, he used a lot of good explanations and references when it came to like the Wright brothers, when it came to Apple's model. But I think at the very end, what really hit, he used Martin Luther King Jr. And he mentioned that Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream, but not an actual plan, right? And so it's everyone kind of chuckled at the end. But how often do we hear that people have a specific plan that they necessarily can't reach after the fact? But if you have a dream, which goes back to the why of what your vision is and how you see things, and you stick to that, people will naturally follow you, right? Or you'll bring in people that have that same dream for themselves, right? Because they see something in you that's really important. So I think that is also really key as we get to the why of the company. If you don't know the why of your company, really focus on that, right? We can do the what, we can do the how, and really focus on what your vision is. And from there, you will attract people. As long as you're living in it and sitting in that, you will naturally attract people that have that same dream, that have that same why. If it's for themselves, they will pour that naturally into your company, right? That just, that will just come, I feel like, full circle. But that's one thing that really caught my attention at the end.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great portion of his TED Talk. And I like also how he talked about when Martin Luther King, that particular speech, that event, and how the grassroots approach. And he kind of pointed out there was not Instagram, there wasn't Facebook. How did he get all these people to come to listen to him give this pivotal and wonderful speech, very powerful speech too? And he kind of tied in that, I think, to the dream or to the idea, and that you can feel it, right? It's something. So if you have to maybe push that over to like a company or a company's purpose, if you feel somebody's dream, their inspiration, their motivation, you can't help but feel drawn to it, I think, in some respects. So if you're a company and you're projecting that, I think you're gonna bring in talent that also feels in a similar way and wants to do great things with you. Because even, whoever is the person who starts the business, I'm sure they have a dream as well. And most employees or most workers, so whether out of college or high school, whatever their next move is, I think a lot of folks have dreams as well. So it's nice to kind of, if you're working with a company and you feel like you're matched up with someone who has a dream and a vision too, you're going to want to hang around and see what happens.
Perfect. That actually leads back to the growth aspect, right, of a company as well. So I think where if you see someone's vision, so if you see like a CEO, a president in their seat that has their specific dream and their vision, and you also agree to that portion, from that stance, like you'll start seeing growth because naturally, as you check off one box, they'll want to go to the next stage, and they always have a vision and a dream to get to the next point. And if you're along with that route, that should also include you as well, right? As long as you're doing your job and, handling everything for the company and learning and growing. I mean, even if you don't have experience in that, to what you mentioned earlier, Chris, someone could have a college degree, someone could have heavy background, but you really learn on the job. I mean, I'm not saying that you don't always learn in college, but when you get that hands-on experience on a company, that's really where like the learning curve really comes from, right? And every company could be doing things differently. So the more you grow and the more you get to that next project, the more experience you have under your belt. And I do feel like that is most critical too, is that as growth comes, I mean, there's been situations where I myself may have not known like everything, right? But I researched on my own. We talked about it on our last podcast, where most payroll people have taught themselves. That's the same for probably some other industries as well. So as long as you get that experience in real time and are open to learning more and researching more on your end, I think that growth factor will always be there, which will in return feed back to employee retention.
Yeah, I agree. And to tie in with growth, as we said before, while competitive based salaries and compensation raise increases and so forth, we don't think that maybe is the top thing, but it is also something that's important. And I think we're seeing it a bit more, where if you're looking on LinkedIn, you're starting to see businesses, they're going to put their salary range out there. Where when I was first starting, which is a while back, you didn't see that as often. Or they might say, well, what do you think the salary range is? And then you have to think, well, maybe I did enough research. I hope so, to be put on that spot. As instead, it's transparent. It's like, this is the skill set that we think is required for this particular role, and this is the salary range. And then it seems like it's an easier way to fit. And I think in some cases, for me at least personally, I think it's almost like starting on the right foot, where I'm like, this is a transparent job description. They're letting you know what the salary range is. You can compare it based on where you live and see, does it line up? And then say, okay, this seems like this is a fair opportunity. Let's get started to the next step. And then, as we started by talking about company culture, I think that's something, for me at least, that makes you lean in a job interview and say, I would like to know more. I would like to hang with this company for a while and see where it goes, where I go. So what do you think about either pay transparency and offering, a fair wages?
Pay transparency is very interesting to me because this is definitely new. When you're in the payroll world and handling people's pay, you see it all the time, right? You have the confidential information, and sometimes it is hard to see if someone has been with the company for 5 to 10 years and then someone new comes in and is making 20K more than them, and sometimes it's because this person supposedly has all this experience. But like we were alluding to earlier, regardless of the actual experience, that's not to say you would be able to fit into another company's dynamic and culture. And then sometimes, I hear it all the time, even with some of our current clients, where people talk a really good game during the interview process, and then they get in the door and they really have no clue. They say they know a system and they don't necessarily know the system. I do like that the pay transparency is coming out. If you've been in the payroll world, you've been handling all the annual reports that get sent, to the certain states. There's certain requirements where filings have to be done. And I think around like COVID, there were trackings around like race and gender and so forth. That was pretty heavily going on behind the scenes. And so clearly something had to have really be shown on that to really get this push going through. And I just think people that don't see the pay behind the scenes are probably really shocked when the pay was actually put out there, because pay is a lot higher than most people really expect. And I've had so many people that, will say, well, this is how much, I make now, but I'm willing to, I don't have to be at that rate. I'm willing to be a little lower just because they want to get into company. And when I'm looking at their rate, I'm like, okay, your rate is actually much less than what the market should be, And so, but it's always nerve-wracking when you're asking for more money or when you're expecting something additional, right? And so you want to try to be accommodating. And really, people don't actually realize you trying to be accommodating is really talking yourself out of a huge pay increase sometimes. And so there are times where companies will go for the lower rate, right? Because if you're making 35 an hour and the average is 45 and you're like, oh yeah, I'm making 35, but it's okay. I could do like 30, 32. I mean, sometimes companies aren't always transparent themselves. And so I think the pay transparency is a really big thing because it's holding everyone accountable. And there are no secrets anymore. And I just think that's only going to make the world stronger in the end.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think a range is okay. I think with pay transparency, you want to have, because there is a skill range as well to fit within that. So if, like you said, if the range is 35 to 40 an hour and somebody feels they fit maybe in the middle, like snugly at $40 an hour, and they make their case, and that's how it works. Or if they perhaps feel like, I'm really into this job, I will say I can do 38 an hour or something like that. And maybe the business says, well, that's okay with us. And I think as long as you feel like the range is competitive and the skills match what the person believes they can offer. And then there's another tie-in, I suppose, with compensation, recognition and rewards, which when you were talking about management before, I think I almost find that I'm always happy to get a raise and the money as the reward or a bonus for a job well done, but also to have that verbal recognition, to have a manager run through the projects you worked on for the year and say, hey, you this is where you were excelling, and maybe you've got some other points, skills to work on for next year, and let's make those goals. For me, that gets me personally like excited to be interested in, okay, we've got next steps. Like I did well. Next year, I'm going to expand and challenge a little bit more. And I feel like my manager is there with me. And I think that really helps me personally.
Yeah, look, a simple thank you goes a long way. I feel like we lose that, right? Even personally, like even within myself and Chris, you may experience this too, where you're just going during the day, the months, then the years. And you sometimes every day could be very hard on yourself, but you don't realize like, okay, wait, if you stop and took a step back, you actually have done like great things, right? Like let's celebrate like the small wins. Actually, your small wins might actually be big wins, right? And you just maybe, so once you get to that point, you're trying to get to the next point, right? So you're not stopping and taking a moment from there. But I would say like work is really like any other relationship, your manager relationships, your teammates relationships. It's just like any other like family relationships or boyfriend, girlfriend relationships, husband, wives. It goes a long way just to acknowledge someone. And I think sometimes we can like nag, and I may be speaking too much female here, but like sometimes we can really just like get drawn into the negative things instead of actually focusing on like the positivity, right? And so there needs to be an equal balance. And yes, if someone needs to be critiqued in the work world, you absolutely need to do that. But if someone is doing things great, you need to also acknowledge that. And I think sometimes we're going back to the culture, going back to managers not necessarily being leaders and not knowing how to lead. That could really drag an employee down. There could be some managers who have very high expectations. And for an employee, maybe something they did was great, right? I think in HR, I used to hear this all the time where employees would come in and they'd be upset because they thought they did something really great, and their manager still talked down to them and was like, well, no, you should have done this. But no, it would have been nice to just, acknowledge, yes, they did do this, that was great, good job, team. But we really need to get to this point. So like, let's celebrate. I don't know, maybe financially, who knows, or maybe bring in some donuts or something, like something small just to like congratulate them, and then make sure, that would encourage them to get to the next project, right? And so if you're not doing that, when they do something and you don't celebrate them, but then you're pressuring them to do more, that's where they get drained. That's where the burnout comes from. That's what turns employees away and then makes them not want to do anything, right? From a go forward stance. And then here you go, where you're having to have these difficult conversations and HR is brought in. So all of that plays a really good key factor to everything.
Yeah, and with regards to donuts, I mean, it's a little something. You said a thank you goes a long way, and it's the thought that counts. And I think even if it's a small gesture, it's a gesture nonetheless, and people do appreciate that. And I know what you were touching on before, where maybe you're with a manager and you get the negative feedback, or maybe it's like one positive thing and then you hear other negative responses. I think there's a phrase that's like everything up until but. So if somebody starts with a compliment and then they go but, and then so I think sometimes it's in the delivery where I'm only speaking from experience on the wonderful managers I've worked with who maybe they have a particular way on how they will line up the things that and the positive things you did well, and then not in a but or other way to almost make you feel like you did okay here, and now I'm going to tell you, where your severe shortcomings are. But instead, they approach it in a different way, where it might just be one meeting where it's just positive feedback, and another meeting is just then now this is one on skills enhancements, and phrase it that way or in such a way that makes it for you to feel like, okay, great, I got the recognition, and it wasn't like, but you didn't do this. And then there's another conversation where it's, here's some additional skills that are going to benefit you for projects next year, and then just keep building off that.
Correct. And I would say, in some situations when you're being critiqued, there are times where managers may notice certain weaknesses, but they don't know how to talk about it, right? And so they won't talk about it, and then it just builds up within them, and then you have no clue, so you're going on with your day-to-day. That's where those conversations really need to become very important for a company. So I think from that stance is the manager trainings are critical, because delivering those difficult critiques to someone and knowing your employee and knowing how to deliver that in a proper way to where it's not going to make them run out the door is mission critical. And so I think just getting those proper trainings in place, having those conversations, or if you need someone else in those conversations, bring your HR team in those conversations. You just don't want employees to feel like they're not being told anything throughout the year, but then increase comes and they think they're doing good and they don't get a good increase, right? Or they're being told great job throughout the year, but they're not being told when they did 3 to 5 things wrong, and then they're just being told a year later in their annual review, right? That would turn anyone away. And so it's just, how do we get to that next level, and can they afford to do manager training, right? And what all that entails, because it is really critical. But if a company can get their why and get their company culture together, get their manager training together, and set proper expectations for all employees on the vision, then they're golden, right? Unfortunately, that's easier said than done.
Yeah, and on the cost, the cost of labor aspect, and to the point you just made about training managers, properly training, good onboarding process, that saves a company money in the long run, because from some research we've done, it's a range or different area of finances, but if you have a turnover, to get that person properly trained and up to speed where the prior person may have been, that could be anywhere from half a year to 9 months and cost the company thousands of dollars throughout the whole process. So if you repeat that a few times, it's almost like you might as well have offered an employee, you might as well have gone to the competitive salary base and said, why don't, because we're spending this much anyway, as well with proper management training, because then you've got the employee retention factor as well.
Exactly. If an employee is asking for an added $5K throughout the year, why not just offer it, right? Because by the time you go through the motions of everything you just spoke about, you're going to find yourself actually spending it more, and so that is something that companies need to consider, right? And should you even wait until the employee asks for it, right? Should you guys get into a room and just give the employees what they need because you recognize their value? Because by the time an employee really has to ask for that, if you deny them later, that could, that's only going to cause more of a headache internally from the company side. So those are all good points.
Yeah, and something else that, if we're keeping on, the effects, this great resignation, the big quit, starting with COVID-19, what many feel was a positive from the workforce world was having these remote and hybrid work arrangements. It seems like that is also a factor with regard to employee retention. And particularly on the global level, if you're looking to get talent in different areas, different countries, you're going abroad, where it might be beneficial for the person looking for a job because maybe they're thinking, well, this company in the US, they don't have a presence here, but wait, they have a remote option here. So maybe I do have a shot at the job. And then from the US company's point of view, maybe they're finding that in certain countries, there are certain occupations or certain fields of study, and there is a wealth of talent there to reach out to. And so they're looking that way as well. And it may end up offering a competitive salary, but it may end up saving a US-based company money to find talent where it exists, if that remote option.
Talent is hard to find. That word just triggered in my head. It's so hard to find nowadays. I don't want to use necessarily the word spoiled, but kind of, when we were all at home and really there were jobs that I think people probably never thought that they could do at home, where we just had to make a way to do at home. There are unfortunately some jobs that could not be at home, but I would say just cutting out traffic, being at home, people realizing ordering food. I mean, back in the day, I would order. I didn't even realize how much money, you knew Uber Eats or DoorDash was expensive, but you didn't even realize until you were at home and you were just making your own food. It's man, we were really dishing out a lot of money for that. So just the cost savings of that, the cost savings of gas, the wear and tear that's no longer on your car, all of that, right, just is a huge factor. And so that is a key we saw that on a lot of the lists that we researched from our side, Chris, working remote. Companies need to be flexible with that, as flexible as possible, even if it's not 5 days, 2 days from home, right? That would be, I think employees would appreciate that, meet each other halfway, be flexible, as long as someone is still doing their work, right? Now, if someone's at home and you don't hear from them all day, that may be a little suspicious. So come on, people, employees, you got to still do your work. You got to still be available and, you got to still move forward with the work progress. But as long as that's happening and you're not seeing a delay or a lack thereof, I think it's needed for employers to be accommodating when it comes to that, just because, if you're refusing to offer 1 to 2 days from home and an employee is just asking for that, and another company comes in, whether they're making the same comp, more comp, or even less comp, they will take that other company that's paying them less just to be at home. I've seen it happen one too many times. And then you're starting that same cycle where you're getting in, you're having to recruit, you got to train someone. There's always going to be probably some type of gap when someone is getting into a new company and learning the ropes of that new company. You're probably going to see some gaps during that time frame. So I would just say just be as accommodating as possible and set the right expectations when someone's at home and what you expect from them. And as long as they're meeting that, I think that should be accommodated for them.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think what you were saying before is important, because with salary and with competitive and flexible benefit offerings, there's a balancing act. So as you just said, someone may take a lower salary to be able to work from home, work remotely a couple of days a week or full time. And there might be a number of other types of benefits that a company can start offering a little bit more flexible with that they are looking to attract and retain talent. And this is something, we've seen in the payroll industry probably about 10 years, but it's been heating up in the past 5 or so. And I think it's still got momentum, and that's the EWA, or earned wage access, which I know we've talked about before. And I think this as a benefit offering sometimes helps with talent when Long-term, things happen, as anyone who's talked about EWA before, and maybe you do need to access your wages a little bit early from time to time. And having that as an option, having flexible holidays, flexible time off, remote working, and other types of benefits like that a company offers, that could also be a factor when you're looking to retain talent.
Yeah. So EWA, I mean, kudos EWA. That's how Chris and I first got
Yes.
connected, and now we're here with the podcast. But yes, earned wage access. There's many companies. We'll get into that in a separate podcast episode from our side. But those are added benefits, and there are some earned wage access companies that it costs the company nothing, right? And the employee gets charged, $1, a couple dollars, just to transfer funds early, and that would be an amazing added benefit, right? To go to your CFO and say, we're going to have this great benefit and it doesn't cost the company anything, they love that. So I think that would all play a huge factor in just keeping employees afloat, because if you get paid on a Friday and, just that Tuesday or Wednesday is really tough and you need gas money, you just need $20, or a light bill's coming up, just something, you just need to go and grab groceries, anything, right? Just to pull over some funds would be good. I mean, you of course don't want to get into a bad repeat cycle with using EWA, but as long as I think it's used responsibly, it could really be a game changer. So that's great that you brought that up. And there's all types of benefits like that, right? Benefits for pets. There's a lot of other ancillary benefits outside of like medical, dental, vision that really would not cost the company a lot, maybe next to anything, but that would be very beneficial for an employee if they want to contribute to that. And so those are all things that we can get into. So now that we're, I think from this stance, I like to maybe just kind of start with closing out, because we came across another Forbes article that was just written this past July of 2023, along the same lines here of employee retention strategies for this year. And so outside of the 15, we pretty much have covered every topic when it comes to this, but the very last one really caught my attention. So I want to talk a little bit more on that. But before we get to the last one, I'll go through quickly their 15 bullet points, which we've already pretty much spoken about throughout this podcast. So number one was offer competitive base salary and hourly wages. Number two was let your employees work from home. So we just discussed that. Number three, provide flexible scheduling and reduce work days. So understanding that there are some people out there trying to get lower hours, less hours than 8 hours working in the day. Not sure how that's going to pan out, but that was on their list. Number four, encourage and promote a work-life balance, which is critical. I would say, for me, even as a manager or leader, if you recognize people that are workhorses, I've definitely been guilty of that myself. Try to help encourage your employees to step away for a little bit, because sometimes people can be their own, worst enemy. Number five, recognize and reward your employees for their work. So we talked about that, simple thank yous. Number six, create a culture that employees want to be a part of. So we talked about that. I would say, even though this is number 6 on their list, I think, culture to me is probably within the top 3, but at least it's definitely on their list. Number 7, build employee engagement. Number 8, create an emphasis on teamwork, which is mission critical. Number 9, reduce employee burnout, right? So this one is unfair treatment at work, an unmanageable workload, lack of manager support. Number 10, provide offerings. So as we've spoken about with the EWA stuff, there's definitely different sites that could help employees. 11, give other job perks, right? So if you're talking about corporateperks.com, I think there's like little gift sites and so forth that you can pay to have employees select little gifts for their birthdays or anniversaries. Those are always good. Number 12, foster growth and offer professional and personal development. So Chris and I talked about that earlier. Really a key factor. Once you get to a certain level in your career, you really want to just make sure you have proper growth and proper vision in place. 13, hire for the culture fit. Culture, back to the culture, very critical. And number 15, know when it's time to say goodbye. And that really, really, really hit home. So number 15, know when it's time to say goodbye. I just have to repeat that. There's so many times, I know I've experienced it. I know many people experience it, right? So when you're faced with a challenge, right, trying to decipher between when it's time for you to walk away, or when this is your next challenge that you need to face and push through, I think is key. And I saw something come across my LinkedIn feed a couple weeks ago, and it was so funny. It was a girl, I forgot her name, but she was talking about before she got into HR, she always thought that, when a company was done with someone, that they would just let them go, right? They would just fire them, they'd have a conversation and so forth. But she was shocked when she got into HR, when she realized that's not the case at all, that they just actually manage people out. It is very key. I'm giving people people may know this, who may not, but that is very right. That's obviously right? You manage people out because lawsuits nowadays, it's too risky sometimes for companies. And I've also seen it one too many times where if a company or a manager already knows that they don't see a future with this person and they're already at a point of managing out, that's when a lot of the issues start occurring, because unknowingly or either knowingly, you start mistreating someone, right? Because you know that they're not going to be a part of your future. When to recognize, when it's time for you to go, or when to recognize if this is your next challenge, I think is very hard for people, for employers and employees. I don't have an answer to this besides the fact of, your situation and just outweighing your pros and cons, right? You really just need to sit down and outweigh your pros and cons. Is this next challenge you're facing worth your health, your mental health, all of that stuff? Is it worth you sticking it out, or is it worth you walking away and exploring your next chapter in life? And I think that really is very, very critical, that I want to close out with, not to get too somber, too sad, but, I know sometimes people can be very competitive. Sometimes people have, I won't say a chip on their shoulder, but sometimes people don't know when to walk away because you're challenged with someone and you're wanting to win. And then from there, you're just dragging yourself, right? And so if it's unhealthy, you do need to step away. And so I definitely wanted to, that just caught my attention when I read that. I'm like, whoa, yeah, know when to walk away, because we all face that. And I just want to, leave a note with everyone that obviously when you know, but don't force yourself. Don't be a square in a circle or a circle in a square. There are so many other opportunities out there for everybody. It may take time to find those opportunities, but don't run yourself dry trying to prove a point. If it's a challenge that you're open and you're willing to accept, that's going to unlock the door to get you to that next level, great. If it's not, and if it's just going to continue to affect you and affect your, even personal life outside of work, you need to make sure, and the Yahoo article said, make sure you have money saved up before you just walk away bravely. Make sure you have all that in place, but then you definitely need to step away. So sorry, Chris, that just really hit me hard on that one when I saw that.
I agree. Very, very well said. And to the point of the Yahoo article, put yourself in a position for success so you can feel like you are comfortable making those moves. And I think that, I don't know if this phenomenon where you said like manage out, it might be, there's a quiet quitting situation we've been talking about. There's also quiet firing, and to recognize that. And as you said with the Yahoo article, to the best of one's ability, kind of prepare for it. And then maybe think back to what we were talking about earlier about dreams. If you're looking to excel and move up in a company and you feel like you're being stifled and you don't feel like you're being heard, I think you'll understand that at a certain point, and then think, well, I can have a conversation with my manager. I can look for maybe lateral moves in the company. And then to your point, when you've exhausted your resources, well, then maybe this just isn't the right fit for me. And another occupation will come to be, and maybe this is the catalyst. This is the moment that drives you to something else. So you can always look at it as a helpful or a teaching moment for yourself too.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for chiming in there, Chris. And I look, these are all great points. I know we're trying to just provide everyone with, good insight from both company and employee perspectives. And employee retention, I know sometimes people may feel stuck at a job, especially if you're dealing with something personal, if you need your benefits, if you need your, funds, but just make sure you're making the best decision for yourself, definitely putting yourself first. So with that being said, that's our episode 2 for employee retention. Thank you all for joining and listening in again. If you made it to the end, please, if you have not subscribed or liked our page, we're on LinkedIn and YouTube, please do so now. But next episode, so we're still going to run these once a month for you all. And next episode, I think we're going to focus on EWA, so earned wage access, and go through as we kind of get from AI to employee retention to heavier benefits that could be really good offerings for companies and for employees. We want to focus more and zero in on that. So there are some concerns. Some people really love it. Some people are concerned by it. And Chris and I met, so we'll remind everyone of the article that we did some months ago as well. So yeah, so we will we'll circle back next month, see you all in September. But everyone, please enjoy your week, and thank you so much for listening.
Take care. Bye, everybody.